Part 1. Early Life and Education. James Madison was born on March 16, 1751, in Port Conway, Virginia, into a prominent and wealthy family of planters. His father, James Madison Sr., was a successful tobacco planter and landowner, and his mother, Nellie Conway Madison, came from a respected Virginia family. Growing up in this privileged environment, Madison had access to the best education available at the time. His parents believed in the importance of learning and hired private tutors to educate him at home. From a young age, Madison showed a keen interest in reading and studying classical languages such as Latin and Greek. He was also introduced to subjects like history, philosophy, and mathematics, which helped develop his intellectual curiosity. As he grew older, Madison's education continued beyond his home. Recognizing his potential, his family sent him to attend the College of New Jersey in Princeton, which is now called Princeton University. He enrolled there in 1769 at the age of 18. During his time at Princeton, Madison studied a broad curriculum that included classical literature, political philosophy, law, and rhetoric. He was an excellent student and quickly gained a reputation for his intelligence and dedication. His studies emphasized the importance of reasoned debate and understanding government principles, ideas that would later influence his work as a statesman. Madison's early life on the Virginia plantation and his rigorous education played a crucial role in shaping his worldview. Growing up in an environment that valued education, liberty, and leadership inspired him to pursue a career dedicated to public service. His strong academic background provided him with the knowledge and skills necessary to participate actively in political debates and to contribute meaningfully to the founding of the United States. Part 2. Political Involvement and Revolutionary War. As James Madison entered his early 20s, he became increasingly active in the political affairs of Virginia and the American colonies. In 1774, at only 23 years old, he was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses, which was the colonial legislative assembly responsible for making laws and representing the interests of Virginia's colonists. This election marked Madison's first significant step into public service and demonstrated his growing commitment to the cause of American independence. In the House of Burgesses, Madison quickly established himself as a thoughtful and articulate young leader who was deeply concerned about colonial rights and freedoms. During this period, tensions between Britain and its American colonies were rising rapidly. The colonies were protesting against unfair taxes, restrictions on trade, and other policies imposed by the British government without colonial representation. These disagreements eventually led to open conflict, known as the American Revolution. Madison was a strong supporter of independence from Britain. He believed that the colonies should unite to form their own government based on principles of liberty, equality, and self-governance. In 1775, Madison was elected as a delegate to the Continental Congress, which was a gathering of representatives from different colonies working together to coordinate their efforts against British rule. Although he was still quite young, Madison's intelligence, dedication, and clear ideas earned him respect among his peers. During his time in Congress, he contributed to important debates about how the new nation should be organized and governed. Madison's involvement in these revolutionary activities helped him develop key ideas about government structure, individual rights, and checks and balances, concepts that would later be incorporated into the U.S. Constitution. He believed that a strong but limited federal government was necessary to protect liberty while maintaining order. His work during this revolutionary period also helped him build relationships with other influential leaders like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. These connections would prove crucial in shaping his future contributions to American politics. Throughout the Revolutionary War years, Madison remained committed to the cause of independence and worked tirelessly to promote ideas that would ensure freedom for future generations. His early political experiences during this tumultuous time laid an important foundation for his later role as a key architect of the United States Constitution and one of its most influential founding fathers. Part 3. Contribution to the U.S. Constitution. After the end of the Revolutionary War, James Madison turned his attention toward creating a stronger and more effective national government. He recognized that the Articles of Confederation, which had been adopted during the war, were too weak to hold the new country together. Under the Articles, the federal government lacked the power to tax, regulate commerce, or enforce laws effectively, which led to economic instability and political disagreements among states. Madison believed that these weaknesses could threaten the survival of the young nation if not addressed. Therefore, he became a leading advocate for drafting a new constitution that would establish a balanced system of government capable of maintaining order while protecting individual liberties. Once enough states ratified the Constitution, most notably Virginia and New York, the new system officially went into effect in 1789. Madison's role did not end there. He was elected as a member of Congress from Virginia, where he continued to influence national policy through legislation and debate. As a congressman, he championed issues such as civil liberties, economic development, and national defense. One of Madison's most important contributions during this period was co-authoring the Federalist Papers, along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. These essays explained and defended key principles of the Constitution, such as separation of powers, checks and balances, and federalism, and helped sway public opinion in favor of ratification. His writings remain some of the most influential explanations of American constitutional philosophy. Part 4. Political career. After a distinguished career as a key architect of the Constitution and a leading figure in early American politics, James Madison's most significant executive role came when he was elected as the fourth President of the United States in 1808. At this point, Madison was recognized as one of the most knowledgeable and experienced leaders in the nation, with a deep understanding of government, law, and diplomacy. His presidency was characterized by both internal challenges and external threats that tested his leadership and the resilience of the young republic. One of the most pressing issues Madison faced upon taking office was escalating tensions with Great Britain. These tensions had been building for years due to British interference with American trade, impressment of American sailors into the British Navy, and ongoing support for Native American tribes resisting American expansion into Western territories. Many Americans believed that these actions threatened their sovereignty and national honor. As a result, Madison believed that decisive action was necessary to defend American interests. In June 1812, after much debate in Congress, Madison asked for a declaration of war against Britain. This decision marked the beginning of the War of 1812, often called America's Second War for Independence. The war was controversial. Some Americans opposed it, fearing it would lead to unnecessary conflict or weaken the economy. Nonetheless, Madison stood firm in his conviction that defending national sovereignty and honor was paramount. He believed that war was inevitable if Britain continued its policies that undermined American rights on the seas and on land. The early stages of the war proved difficult for the United States. The young nation's military forces were relatively untrained and poorly equipped compared to Britain's seasoned army and navy. The Americans faced setbacks in several battles, including an unsuccessful attempt to invade Canada and defeats along the Great Lakes. In 1814, British forces launched a major attack on Washington, D.C., capturing and setting fire to many government buildings, including the Capitol and the White House, an event that shocked Americans but also strengthened their resolve to defend their country. After serving 2 terms from 1809 to 1817, Madison chose not to seek re-election in order to retire from public life peacefully. However, even after leaving office, he remained active intellectually, writing essays on constitutional issues and engaging in discussions about governance. His post-presidential years were dedicated to preserving his legacy as one of America's founding fathers who helped shape its constitutional framework. In his later life, Madison also played an important role as an elder statesman who advised future leaders on matters related to liberty, governance, and constitutional interpretation. His writings continued to influence political thought well into the 19th century. His resilience under pressure and unwavering dedication to protecting American sovereignty cemented his legacy as one of America's most influential founders who helped secure its place as an independent nation capable of facing global challenges. Part 5. Presidency, 1809 to 1817. After concluding his 2 terms as president in 1817, James Madison chose to step back from the intense demands of public office and return to his beloved estate at Montpelier in Virginia. Despite retiring from active political leadership, Madison remained intellectually engaged and continued to contribute to the development of American political thought. His post-presidential years were marked by reflection, scholarship, and mentorship, during which he sought to preserve the principles of the Constitution he had helped craft and to guide future generations in understanding the importance of Republican government. Madison dedicated much of his time to studying law, history, and political philosophy. He was deeply committed to ensuring that the constitutional framework would endure and adapt over time. His writings from this period include essays, letters, and reflections that elaborated on the ideas of liberty, federalism, and the separation of powers. These writings not only reinforced his own beliefs, but also served as influential texts for scholars and policymakers. His work on the Federalist Papers, originally published during the ratification debates, became a cornerstone of American constitutional interpretation. These essays articulated complex ideas about checks and balances, the necessity of a strong yet limited federal government, and the importance of protecting individual rights against potential tyranny. Throughout these years, Madison also played an advisory role in national affairs. Although he was no longer holding office, his experience and wisdom made him a sought-after voice on constitutional issues. He advised presidents like John Quincy Adams and later contributed to discussions about expanding the nation's infrastructure, such as roads, canals, and other internal improvements, that would facilitate commerce and westward expansion. His support for these projects helped lay the groundwork for economic growth that would propel America into its next phase of development. Madison's commitment to civil liberties remained a central aspect of his legacy. He believed that freedom of conscience was fundamental to a free society. His advocacy for religious liberty was particularly notable. He championed laws that protected individuals' rights to worship freely without government interference. His efforts contributed significantly to religious freedom legislation in Virginia and across the nation, reinforcing the idea that government should not infringe upon personal beliefs. In addition to his intellectual pursuits, Madison served as a mentor for many younger politicians and scholars who looked up to him as a guiding figure in American politics. His deep understanding of constitutional principles made him an influential advisor on matters related to governance, lawmaking, and national policy. Despite his age, he lived into his mid-80s, Madison remained active in discussions about America's future direction. James Madison's death on June 28, 1836, marked the end of an era. He was mourned nationwide as one of America's most important founders, whose vision helped establish a stable republic rooted in democratic ideals. His contributions extended beyond drafting foundational documents. They encompassed shaping political philosophy, advocating for civil liberties, promoting economic development through infrastructure projects, and mentoring future leaders. His legacy endures through numerous institutions named after him, such as Madison University, and through ongoing scholarly study of his writings and ideas. Historians regard him as the father of the Constitution because of his central role in drafting it and defending its ratification. His leadership during critical moments like the War of 1812 demonstrated resilience under pressure and a steadfast commitment to defending American sovereignty. Today, Madison is remembered not only for his pivotal role in creating America's foundational legal framework, but also for his lifelong dedication to liberty, limited government, and national unity. His ideas continue to influence debates about governance in modern America, about balancing federal authority with states' rights, and serve as guiding principles for preserving democracy amid changing times. In summary, Part 5 provides an extensive look at James Madison's life after serving as president, highlighting his scholarly pursuits at Montpelier, his mentorship roles within American political circles, his writings that continue to shape constitutional understanding today, and how his enduring principles have left an indelible mark on the development of American democracy. His lifelong dedication to liberty and constitutionalism remains a guiding light for Americans seeking to uphold democratic values in an ever-evolving nation. James Monroe, the fifth President of the United States, is remembered as a statesman who played a pivotal role in shaping the young nation's foreign policy and guiding it through a period of growth and expansion. To truly understand his contributions and leadership style, it is essential to explore his early life, upbringing, education, military service, and the foundational experiences that prepared him for his future roles in government. Early life in Virginia. James Monroe was born on April 28, 1758, in Westmoreland County, Virginia. His family was part of the Virginia gentry, wealthy landowners who held significant social standing in colonial society. His father was Spence Monroe, a successful planter and surveyor, and his mother was Elizabeth Jones Monroe. The Monroes owned a large estate called Oak Hill, which provided James with an upbringing immersed in the values of hard work, education, and civic responsibility. Growing up in Virginia during the colonial period meant that Monroe was exposed to the political debates surrounding independence from Britain. The colonies were increasingly asserting their rights against British interference, and these tensions would influence Monroe's worldview from an early age. Education at the College of William and Mary. As a young boy, Monroe displayed intelligence and ambition. Recognizing the importance of education for his future leadership role, he attended the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg at the age of 16. The college was one of the most prestigious institutions in America at that time and had a reputation for producing influential leaders. At William and Mary, Monroe studied classical subjects, such as Latin and Greek, along with law and government. His education emphasized rhetoric, skills essential for effective leadership, and fostered a sense of civic duty. During his time there, he was influenced by Enlightenment ideas circulating through Europe and America, concepts emphasizing reason, individual rights, and governance by consent. Military service. During the American Revolutionary War, Monroe's education was interrupted by the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783. At just 16 years old, when hostilities began, he felt compelled to serve his country. He joined the Continental Army as a cadet in 1775, a decision driven by patriotism and a desire to fight against British tyranny. During his military service, Monroe demonstrated bravery and leadership. He participated in several key battles across New York and New Jersey. Notably, he fought at the Battle of Trenton in December 1776, a turning point where George Washington's army crossed the Delaware River. Post-war education and legal training. After the war ended with American independence in 1783, Monroe returned to Virginia. Recognizing that legal knowledge would be vital for his future ambitions in public service, he pursued further study in law. He apprenticed under local lawyers to learn practical skills or attended formal legal courses available at that time. By 1783 or 1784, around age 25, Monroe had gained enough legal expertise to begin practicing law himself. His reputation as an intelligent lawyer grew quickly due to his diligence and eloquence. Entry into politics. Early public service. Monroe's interest in politics was sparked during this period. He became involved in local civic affairs, serving on county committees or participating in community debates about governance. His natural leadership abilities attracted attention among Virginia's political circles. In 1782, at just 24 years old, Monroe was elected to represent Westmoreland County in Virginia's House of Delegates, the state legislature. This marked the beginning of his formal political career. As a legislator during this formative period for American democracy, he learned firsthand about legislative processes and governance. Monroe's diplomatic career began relatively early compared to many other politicians. In 1794, at only 36 years old, he was appointed as Minister Plenipotentiary, a diplomatic envoy, to France by President George Washington. This appointment reflected both Monroe's rising reputation and Washington's confidence in his abilities. During his time in France, 1794 to 1796, Monroe experienced firsthand the tumultuous events of revolutionary France, the Reign of Terror, and observed European politics closely. His diplomatic mission involved managing relations with France during its revolutionary upheaval, while protecting American interests abroad. This experience broadened Monroe's understanding of international affairs and diplomacy, a skill set that would prove invaluable later when he served as Secretary of State under President James Madison. After returning from France, due to health issues or diplomatic disagreements, the details are complex, Monroe continued his political ascent within Virginia politics. He served as a delegate to state conventions advocating for ratification of the U.S. Constitution, a crucial step toward establishing federal authority over individual states. He also served as a member of Virginia's state legislature again, before being appointed as Minister to Great Britain, 1803 to 1807. These diplomatic postings helped him develop relationships with key foreign leaders and gain experience navigating international negotiations. In 1811, President James Madison appointed Monroe as Secretary of State, a position that made him one of the most influential figures in American foreign policy before becoming president himself. As Secretary of State from 1811 until 1817, when he became president, Monroe oversaw important negotiations related to territorial expansion, such as acquiring Florida, and managed delicate relations with European powers during wartime. His tenure included handling issues arising from conflicts like the War of 1812 against Britain, a war that tested America's sovereignty, and negotiating treaties that expanded U.S. territory westward. His upbringing instilled values such as patriotism, resilience during wartime strengthened his resolve, diplomatic service provided him with skills necessary for negotiation, legislative experience gave him insight into governance. All these elements combined made him uniquely prepared for presidency. In summary, James Monroe's early life laid a solid foundation built on education, military service, diplomacy, lawmaking, all driven by a deep sense of civic duty that would define his approach as one of America's most influential presidents during its formative years. The presidency of James Monroe, spanning from 1817 to 1825, is often regarded as one of the most peaceful and prosperous periods in American history. Marked by political harmony, territorial growth, and diplomatic successes, Monroe's 2 terms in office laid foundational principles for the young nation's future. To understand this pivotal era fully, it is essential to explore the circumstances surrounding his election, the major policies he implemented, the cultural and political climate known as the Era of Good Feelings, domestic developments that shaped America's growth, and his foreign policy achievements that established the nation's stature on the world stage. James Monroe was elected as the 5th President of the United States in 1816. His victory was decisive. He secured over 80% of the electoral votes, reflecting widespread support across different regions. The election was characterized by a lack of serious opposition, an indication of the political consensus at the time, and marked the beginning of what would be called the Era of Good Feelings. Monroe's campaign emphasized national unity, stability, and continuity following the tumultuous years of Revolutionary War and early partisan conflicts. Monroe was inaugurated on March 4, 1817. His inaugural address focused on healing divisions within the country and promoting a sense of shared purpose among Americans. His leadership style was characterized by moderation and a desire to unify a nation still grappling with its identity after independence. Monroe sought to strengthen federal authority while respecting states' rights. He supported internal improvements, such as roads and canals, to facilitate commerce and movement westward. His administration also focused on economic development, encouraging industry, agriculture, and infrastructure projects that would bind different regions together economically. A significant aspect of Monroe's domestic policy was his stance on tariffs and banking. He supported protective tariffs that encouraged American manufacturing, but balanced this with efforts to maintain good relations with southern states dependent on agriculture. His administration also worked toward establishing a stable national currency through support for banking institutions. The term Era of Good Feelings is often used to describe Monroe's presidency because it was marked by relative political harmony compared to earlier years filled with partisan strife. The Federalist Party had largely faded after their opposition during the War of 1812, leaving Democratic Republicans as the dominant political force. During this period, there was a sense of national pride rooted in recent military victories, most notably the end of the War of 1812 and territorial expansion. The country experienced economic growth, driven by increased trade and westward migration. However, beneath this veneer of unity were underlying tensions, particularly over issues like slavery, states' rights versus federal authority, and economic policies that would resurface later but remained subdued during Monroe's terms. Monroe's presidency coincided with significant westward expansion. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 had already doubled U.S. territory. During his administration, this expansion continued through negotiations and treaties. One notable achievement was acquiring Florida from Spain in 1819 through the Adams-Onis Treaty, also known as the Transcontinental Treaty. This treaty not only added Florida to U.S. territory, but also settled boundary disputes with Spain, an important step toward continental consolidation. The period also saw increased settlement in territories such as Missouri and Illinois. This westward movement prompted infrastructure development. Roads like the National Road, begun earlier but expanded during Monroe's presidency, canals connecting inland waterways, and improvements in transportation that facilitated migration and commerce. Economic growth was further stimulated by burgeoning industries such as textiles in New England and agriculture in frontier regions. These developments contributed to a sense of national progress, but also raised questions about how new territories would be governed, issues that forced. Monroe's foreign policy was characterized by a desire for peaceful relations with other nations while asserting American interests abroad. His administration adopted principles that would become cornerstones of U.S. foreign policy, the so-called Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, 1823, declared that European powers should cease colonizing or interfering with independent nations in North and South America. It asserted U.S. sphere of influence rights over its hemisphere, a bold statement for a young nation seeking respect on the global stage. This doctrine was motivated by concerns over European recolonization efforts in Latin America following independence movements there. It aimed to prevent European intervention while promising non-interference from America in European affairs. In addition to asserting regional dominance through diplomacy rather than military force, Monroe worked diligently to maintain peace with Britain, a key trading partner, and other nations through treaties and negotiations. The acquisition of Florida from Spain exemplified Monroe's diplomatic approach, using negotiation rather than conflict to expand U.S. territory peacefully. While not directly part of foreign policy per se, domestic issues related to slavery became prominent during Monroe's presidency. The Missouri Compromise, 1820, was enacted during his tenure, a legislative effort to balance free states and slave states within Congress. Missouri's request for admission as a slave state threatened sectional balance. Thus, Congress passed this compromise which admitted Missouri as a slave state, while Maine entered as a free state, maintaining equilibrium between North and South. This legislation temporarily eased tensions but foreshadowed future conflicts over slavery's expansion into new territories, a contentious issue that would eventually lead to civil war decades later. His tenure exemplified an optimistic vision for America, a nation confident in its identity as an independent power, capable of shaping its destiny through diplomacy rather than conflict alone. The era of good feelings remains emblematic not only because it reflected political harmony, but also because it set patterns for future growth, both territorial and institutional, that would define America's trajectory well into the 19th century. The Monroe Doctrine, proclaimed in 1823 during President James Monroe's administration, stands as one of the most significant and enduring principles in the history of American foreign policy. It marked a decisive moment when the United States articulated its stance on hemispheric sovereignty and established a policy framework that would influence international relations for nearly 2 centuries. This doctrine was not merely a statement of intent, but a strategic declaration that shaped the United States' approach to its regional environment, asserting its interests. To understand the significance of the Monroe Doctrine, it is essential to consider the geopolitical landscape of the early 19th century. During this period, many Latin American countries were engaged in revolutionary struggles against European colonial powers, primarily Spain and Portugal, seeking independence after centuries of colonial rule. These independence movements gained momentum in the aftermath of Napoleon's invasion of Spain, 1808 to 1814, which destabilized Spanish authority and created opportunities for colonies to seek self-rule. Simultaneously, European powers were eager to reassert control over their former colonies or expand their influence into the newly independent nations. Britain, France, Russia, and other European nations had strategic interests in Latin America and sought to establish or maintain colonies and spheres of influence. Britain in particular had economic interests in Latin America and was wary of any European attempts at colonization that could threaten free trade routes. The United States, still a relatively young nation with limited global influence, but growing confidence after its victory in the War of 1812 against Britain, watched these developments with concern. Many Americans believed that European intervention could threaten the stability and security of the Western Hemisphere, an area they increasingly considered within their sphere of influence. The origins of the Monroe Doctrine are rooted in both domestic political considerations and international strategic interests. President James Monroe and his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, who played a pivotal role in shaping the doctrine, sought to protect newly independent Latin American nations from European recolonization efforts while simultaneously asserting U.S. dominance in the hemisphere. At this time, Britain was engaged in negotiations with Spain over territorial disputes in South America. British diplomats recognized that a unified American stance against European intervention could serve British interests by limiting other European powers' influence while maintaining open trade routes. Britain's naval power was formidable enough to enforce policies that aligned with U.S. interests without direct military conflict. In this context, Adams proposed a policy that would prevent European nations from establishing new colonies or interfering with existing independent states in the Americas, a move designed to safeguard Latin American independence while also curbing European ambitions that could threaten U.S. security. On December 2, 1823, President James Monroe delivered an annual address to Congress. Non-colonization. The Western Hemisphere was no longer open for colonization by European powers. Any attempt by Europeans to establish new colonies or reassert control over former colonies would be viewed as acts of aggression against the United States. Non-intervention. The United States would oppose any European intervention in the affairs of independent nations in North and South America. This included interference through military force or political meddling. Recognition of sovereignty. The doctrine recognized existing Latin American republics as independent states deserving respect for their sovereignty. U.S. neutrality. While asserting U.S. opposition to European intervention, It also emphasized that America would abstain from involvement in European wars or conflicts unless directly threatened. Hemisphere security. The doctrine established that any attempt by Europe to extend its influence into the Western Hemisphere would be viewed as a threat to U.S. peace and safety. The language used was firm yet cautious. It aimed to assert U.S. interests without provoking immediate conflict, but laid down clear boundaries for European actions. Initially, the Monroe Doctrine had little immediate effect because it lacked enforcement mechanisms. It was primarily a diplomatic statement rather than an enforceable policy backed by military power. At this point in history, Britain's naval dominance meant that enforcement relied heavily on British cooperation or on diplomatic pressure rather than direct U.S. military action. European powers largely ignored the doctrine at first because they did not perceive it as an immediate threat or lacked interest in challenging British naval supremacy or risking conflict with the United States over distant territories. However, despite its limited immediate impact, the doctrine served as an important symbolic assertion of American independence and regional dominance, a message that would resonate through subsequent decades. Throughout the 19th century, especially during periods when U.S.-European tensions flared, such as during conflicts involving Spain or France, elements of the Monroe Doctrine were invoked selectively by U.S. policymakers to justify intervention or assert influence. In particular, during conflicts like the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, aspects aligned with expansionist policies. In later years, presidents like Theodore Roosevelt expanded upon Monroe's principles with policies such as big stick diplomacy, emphasizing active intervention when U.S. interests were threatened. The doctrine became more assertive during times when U.S. power grew stronger, most notably under Theodore Roosevelt's presidency, with actions like intervening in Canada. In 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt formally extended Monroe's original principles through his corollary to address perceived instability among Latin American nations, threatening regional order. Chronic wrongdoing, or an impotence which results in a general loosening of ties of civilized society, may ultimately require intervention by some civilized nation. I have been driven to this alternative because I do not intend that America shall become a police station for the world. This shift transformed Monroe's passive warning into an active justification for U.S. intervention throughout Latin America, an approach often criticized for undermining sovereignty, but also seen as establishing regional dominance. The Monroe Doctrine has had a profound impact on American foreign policy. It established hemispheric dominance as a core principle. It served as justification for later interventions. It symbolized America's desire for regional leadership. It influenced international law regarding sovereignty and non-interference. Throughout history, presidents have invoked or referenced it to justify actions ranging from diplomatic protests to military interventions across Latin America and beyond. Despite its importance, critics argue that the doctrine was used selectively to justify imperialism. It often ignored Latin American sovereignty. It contributed to long-term resentment among Latin American nations toward U.S. dominance. Its enforcement depended heavily on British naval power initially. Thus, it reflected Anglo-American cooperation more than pure American initiative at first. Others see it as an essential assertion of regional independence from European colonial ambitions, a necessary step given historical context. Today, while no longer explicitly invoked as rigidly as before due to changes in international law and global politics post-World War II, Elements of Monroe's principles still underpin U.S.-Latin America relations. The idea that external powers should not interfere militarily remains influential. The concept of hemispheric security continues through organizations like Organization of American States, OAS. Contemporary debates about intervention often echo themes first articulated by Monroe nearly 2 centuries ago. The Monroe Doctrine remains one of America's most significant foreign policy doctrines, not merely because it defined boundaries against European colonialism, but because it symbolized America's emergence onto the world stage as a regional power willing to defend its interests assertively, yet cautiously.
As he aged into his 70s and 80s, Monroe's health gradually declined. The physical toll of a lifetime of public service became evident. He suffered from ailments common among aging individuals of that era: arthritis, declining eyesight, and general frailty. Despite these health issues, Monroe remained mentally sharp well into old age. He continued reading extensively, particularly history, and maintained correspondence with friends and family members. His letters reveal a man reflective about his life experiences, the Revolutionary War, presidency, diplomatic service, and about the future direction of the nation. Elizabeth Monroe's death in 1830 marked a significant turning point in James Monroe's later life. Her passing left him grief-stricken. She had been not only his wife, but also his confidant and partner through decades of public service. Following her death, Monroe's health appeared to decline more rapidly. He became more introspective and sought solace in solitude or quiet companionship with close friends. The loss underscored the importance he placed on family bonds and personal relationships. Other loved ones also passed away during this period. His children predeceased him or lived far away, further emphasizing the solitude that characterized his final years. Throughout his retirement, James Monroe engaged in efforts to preserve his legacy through writing. He authored memoirs recounting significant events from his life: his role in the American Revolution, diplomatic negotiations such as the Louisiana Purchase Treaty negotiations with France, 1803, his presidency, including key policies like the Missouri Compromise, 1820, and reflections on American history. His writings aim to provide future generations with insights into early American history from someone who had participated directly in shaping it. These memoirs were published posthumously but reflect Monroe's desire to ensure that his contributions would be remembered accurately. Monroe also expressed interest in education and historical preservation during this period. He believed that understanding history was vital for national unity and progress. Although he did not establish any formal institutions himself during retirement, unlike some contemporaries, he supported initiatives promoting education about America's founding principles. He corresponded with scholars interested in American history and occasionally offered advice or encouragement for projects related to preserving historical sites or documenting early American events. As he approached advanced age, living into his late 70s, the reality of mortality became more apparent to James Monroe. Despite physical ailments, he maintained an optimistic outlook rooted in faith, a common trait among many founding-era figures who believed strongly in divine providence guiding their lives. He expressed gratitude for having lived through such transformative times, a period marked by revolution, growth, conflict, and felt pride that he had contributed significantly to shaping America's destiny. James Monroe died peacefully on July 4th, Independence Day, in 1831, at Ashlawn Highland at age 73. The anniversary symbolically fitting given his lifelong dedication to American independence and sovereignty. His death marked the end of an era. He was mourned nationwide as one of America's most distinguished statesmen, a founding father who had served as diplomat, senator, governor of Virginia, before becoming president twice, and who played an integral role in defining early U.S. foreign policy through doctrines like that which bears his name. His funeral was attended by numerous dignitaries, including former colleagues, and reflected widespread respect
for his contributions to American independence and nation-building efforts. Following his death, James Monroe's legacy continued to be celebrated across America. Monuments were erected honoring him, including statues at various locations, and historical sites like Ashlawn Highland became preserved landmarks illustrating early American history. His presidential papers were collected into archives for study by historians seeking insights into early U.S. diplomacy and governance. Scholars recognized him as an influential figure whose leadership helped shape America's identity during its formative years. Monroe's post-presidential years exemplified humility combined with reflection on achievement, a desire not for fame, but for peace and stability for America. His commitment to Republican ideals persisted even after leaving office. He believed deeply in national unity, a principle that guided much of U.S. foreign policy during subsequent generations. His life after presidency demonstrated how one could retire from public office, yet remain engaged with ideas about nationhood through writing memoirs or supporting educational initiatives, and how personal loss could deepen one's appreciation for family bonds amid aging challenges.